Now in this lecture we will handle the general. So in general here you can see we can put the description. So for example, I can put anything here. This is a test description for example. All right, so put any description regarding for that job. So this job is responsible for blah blah blah, you can put it here. And this another job is responsible for specific things, you can put it here. All right, now actually this is a good practice or a best practice, let's say, because if you provide and if you documented everything, then it is better actually for everyone. All right, now the second thing is as you can see, the discard old objects. Now you can see that here the option with discard old builds. So if you click here, you can see we can see more information about it. So you can see that this determines when, if ever, build records for this project should be discarded. And you can read more about it actually, as is, if you can see here, Jenkins offered two options for determining when builds should be discarded: the build age and the build count. So for the build age, discard builds when they reach a certain age, for example 7 days or old or whatever. But for the build count, discard the oldest build when a certain number of builds already existed. So for example, we have 10 builds and the 11 build came by, so one of the builds will be removed, the oldest one I mean. And you can read more about it, but as you can see, it's from its name, as you can see, discard old page. Now here the strategy is the log rotation. The days to keep build, here you can put days to keep the build. I want it to be kept for 3 days, as you can see, or whatever. And here you can see, if not empty, build records are only kept up to this number of days. So the maximum number of builds to keep, for example, I want the builds to be kept for 10 days only. And here another note, as you can see, if not empty, so this job, only up to this number of build records are kept. So only up to 10 days of the builds will be kept. If I click on the advanced, you can see that there are days to keep artifacts. Now artifacts, this is something, so after each build, Jenkins generate artifacts, and this can be used with JUnit and actually a lot of use cases. And here you can see that we can keep the days of artifacts, keep the number of builds to keep with artifacts, and they are the same actually. All right, now this is the third thing. Okay, now here is the GitHub project. So if you have a specific project on GitHub, you can provide the link here on the project URL. Now if I click on the advanced, you can put the display name for this project. Now this build requires the lockable resources. So if you can see here, you can see that we can put the resource we want and the label. If you have a lockable resources, you can specify it here actually, but this is something we will not handle actually. So this project is parameterized. So if I click it, you can see that you can, as you can see here, parameters allow you to prompt users for one or more inputs that will be passed into the build. So for example, you might have a project that runs test on demand by allowing user to upload zip file with binary to be tested. So for example, if I click, this project is parameterized, add the parameter you want. If it's boolean, choice, credentials, file, multi-line, password, run, or string. So let's put a string parameter, for example. Now here you can put the name of the string, for example, bar1. The default value, for example, I want it to be 0, okay, or null. Now the description, please add a value for this thing. Well, wherever you are putting. So for example, you want specific parameters for your builds, specific directory, specific name for a specific file, or whatever. Well, it's up to you actually. I'm teaching you the options you have. You are the engineer that will do the job, right? Afterward. Again, please add a value for this thing. This is the plain text. Trim the string. So if you want to trim the string, like if you can see here, strip white spaces from the beginning and ending of the string. So you typed 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, you can trim that, it's okay. Okay, but for now let's leave it as is. So let's save it for now and test it out actually. So if I click on build, you can see now the build became build with parameters. So click on it, you can see that this build requires parameters, and you can see that the bar1, the one we named it bar1, which is the parameter 1. Now here, please add a value for this thing. So let's put nothing. This must give us the null value. All right, so I built and it is worked 100%. If I click it in here, well, actually we didn't provide anything to see the parameters. So for now, let's assume it has been worked successfully. Let's return back here. Now, as you can see, this is the project is parameterized. Now you can see that we have this option, which is the throttle builds. So here, actually, this is something used to enforce a minimum time between builds based on the desired maximum rate. So you can see this doesn't enforce an average rate, it only looks at the time since last build. Okay, so this means that if I click on here, you can see that this is the number of builds that are allowed. All right, and this is the time period in second, minute, or whatever. And you can see that approximately is 60 minutes between builds. So for example, I want to run this build only once every 60 minutes. Within these 60 minutes, I don't need anyone to run the job. Or if there are many jobs that been triggered, for example, with GitHub, pull request, push events, or whatever, I don't need that job. So for example, this job is scanning a specific part of the code. You don't need to run it twice within that 60 minutes, for example. So you can put that I need only number of builds, which is 1, and I can allow that. And here you can see allow user triggered build to skip the rate limit. You can read more about it. So if you want enabling this option to permit user triggered build to skip the rate limit. Okay, the rate limit, which is the 60 minute, as you can see, the one here. Now here you can see we have this option, which is disable this project. So you want this project to be existed, but at the same time you don't need anyone to be able to run it. You can just disable it here. Now actually this is something very useful. Now here you can see that execute concurrent builds if necessary. So if I click on it, so let's save that and let's test it out. It's okay. If I click on build and another build, you can see that I run the 3 and 4 at the same time. Well, actually, maybe because we didn't have any build actually, because it is very fast, we didn't notice. But you can see that it is at 8 and 14 p.m. and here is 8 and 14 p.m., which means that they are parallel. All right. Well, actually, because we don't have any build, actually, no execution, no shell script to run, nothing. But this is something we will handle in the next lectures, don't worry. So we didn't notice actually that if it is parallel or not. But let's assume it is parallel, all right? Because this is what execute concurrent builds if necessary. All right, so far so good. Now we have this option, which is the advanced, but this is something actually will not handle actually. So you can see that we have quiet period, retry count, block build when upstream project is building, block build when downstream project is building. Now these two things actually they are very important, but you will handle them actually on the build triggers here. You can see, and you can see we have this option, but we will talk about it when it is time. All right. So these are very important. Remember them for now. We will use them later on. Okay, so block build when upstream project is building. So the upstream project actually, this is something before the current project, which is this project. So I want to pre-test. I want to create, for example, pre-test job, the test job, and a post-test job. So which is something before test job and something after the test job. So I can block this project if I want to make sure that the pre-test job, which is something before this test job, I want to make sure that the pre-test job is completed 100% execution, and then I can run the test job, as well as the downstream. So if my downstream, which is the post test job, is running, I can't run the test job until it is complete. So as you can see, I can enable this option, which is the block build when downstream is building. All right. Now here you can see that we can use the custom workspace, and you can put your specific directory. So I don't need it to be var lib Jenkins workspace whatever. I can put any place where I want. But remember, make sure just your Jenkins user, the Jenkins user on the server, I mean on the Jenkins server as a shell level, make sure it has the required permission for that specific location or that specific directory, which is the workspace we are talking about. As you can see, the directory. And here you can put the display name. And here, if you can see, the optional display name is shown for the project throughout the Jenkins Web GUI as it display purposes only. The display name is not required, as you can see. Is not required to be unique amongst projects. Now here finally you can see that we have the keep the build logs of dependencies. So you can see that the build logs will be there, and this is something, as you can see, all of the build are referenced from build of this project. So via the fingerprint will be protected from log rotation. So even though you deleted, you can see that the something we talked about, which is the discard old builds. Even though you discard the old builds, no, you can still keep the build logs of the dependencies. And this is something actually very useful if you want to investigate why this happened, or why some behavior happened, or whatever, or you want to investigate if we have a malicious users on our company or whatever. Okay, but this is something useful. All right, now in the next lecture we will start handle the source code management, the none or the get, and this is something very useful actually and very widely used. Okay, I will see you there.